Most people hear the phrase, start investing with $50 and think it is not worth the effort. Too small to matter. For most of investing history, they were right. Not because the math was wrong, but because the system made it nearly impossible. That has changed. The numbers behind what $50 can actually become over time are not what most people expect. For decades, getting into the market with small amounts was structurally blocked. A single trade at Schwab in 1988 cost a minimum of $39 in commissions. You would hand over more than half your money before the market even touched it. Then in October 2019, Schwab cut its commission to zero. Within 10 days, TD, Ameritrade, E-Trade, and Fidelity all matched the change. Fidelity had already launched zero expense ratio index funds the year before, with no minimum, no commissions, and a 0.0% annual fee. The infrastructure to invest $1 or $50 at essentially no cost finally existed. The question became, what does that actually produce? Here is where the math gets uncomfortable in a good way. $50 a month invested in something tracking the S&P 500 at its historical average of roughly 10% annually becomes around $38,000 over 20 years. Over 30 years, $113,000. You contributed $18,000 total. The rest is the market working on itself, compounding returns on returns year after year against a savings account at the national average of 0.6%. That same $50 a month over 30 years produces about $19,700, barely more than you put in. The gap between those two outcomes is not luck or timing or picking the right stock. It is whether the money was in the market at all. That's what compound interest actually means in practice. It's not a concept, it's a mechanism. In the early years, the growth feels slow. After 10 years at $50 a month, you would have around $10,000. Underwhelming, maybe, but the engine is building. By year 20, the balance has nearly quadrupled to $38,000. By year 30, it more than triples again to $113,000. The growth is not linear, it accelerates. The money you invested in year 1 has been compounding for 30 years. That first $50 left alone did more work than any $50 you will ever put in manually. And that's the part worth sitting with. The earlier you start, the more of that acceleration you capture. 10 years of delay, starting at 35 instead of 25, does not cost you 10 years of contributions. It costs you the most powerful decade of compounding, the one where the engine is running at full speed. The math does not care about salary, background, or market knowledge. It cares about time. Now, two things can get between you and those numbers. The first is fees. Fidelity and Schwab charge essentially nothing to access this, but the apps built specifically for small investors, Acorns being the most prominent, charge $3 a month on the basic plan. On a $50 account, that is $36 a year, an effective annual fee of 72%. That's not a rounding error, that's the compound interest working against you instead of for you. Acorns' own filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission states the fee structure may not be appropriate where the fee could represent a large percentage of the total invested. The infrastructure that costs nothing exists. It is just not the one with the best marketing. The second thing that gets between people and those returns is behavior. DALBAR has tracked the gap between what markets return and what actual investors earn for over 30 years. In 2024, the S&P returned 25%. The average equity fund investor earned 16.5%. Over 20 years, that behavioral gap becomes catastrophic. $100,000 grows to $717,000 with buy and hold, versus $346,000 for the average investor. More than half the available gains are gone, and not because of fees, but because of behavior. Investors sell after drops, buy after surges, and react to every piece of news. Research across 66,000 brokerage accounts confirm this. The most active traders earned 11% net annually while the market returned almost 18%. The least active traders slightly beat the market. Active traders. There is a story, almost certainly apocryphal, that Fidelity's best performing accounts belonged to people who had forgotten they even had one. It circulated for years because it described something the data kept proving. The enemy of compound interest is not a bad market. It is an investor who will not leave it alone. Compound interest. So the answer to whether $50 is worth starting with is not really about $50. It is about what $50 becomes when the fees are zero, the platform is boring by design, and the account is left to do its job. The math is patient. The compounding does not need your attention, it needs your absence. Starting with $50 is not a consolation prize for people who cannot afford more. It is the actual mechanism, repeated, automated, ignored. The people who capture those $100,000 outcomes over 30 years are not the ones who picked the best stocks. They are the ones who started early and kept it simple.